I worked the overnight shift at a distribution warehouse for just under 2 years. It was a big place, the kind of facility where the shelving units go up about 30 feet, and the aisles between them seem to go on forever when you are the only person in there. I worked alone from 10 at night until 6 in the morning. My job was to do receiving checks on late deliveries, cycle through inventory on certain sections each night, and make sure the loading dock area was secured before I handed the building over to the day shift. I liked it, honestly. I am an introverted person, and 8 hours of quiet work with nobody asking me anything suited me well. I had a routine that I followed the same way every night, and after a few months, it became almost meditative. I knew every sound that building made, the way the HVAC clicked on and off in the northwest corner, the low hum from the refrigeration units in Section 7, the specific creak of the main loading dock door when the temperature outside dropped below freezing. I knew all of it, which is why, about 18 months into the job, I knew immediately when something was different. It was a Tuesday night in early November. I had done my first inventory loop, and I was coming back through the East Wing, heading toward the break room for my midnight meal. The East Wing is the oldest section of the building, concrete floors, older shelving, and it always ran a few degrees colder than the rest of the facility for reasons nobody had ever fully explained to me. I was about halfway down the main aisle when I noticed that one of the dock doors at the far end was not fully closed. Now, I need to explain something about the dock doors in that building. They were heavy industrial roll-up doors, the kind that take real effort to move manually and that are supposed to be secured from the inside with a heavy pin lock that you had to physically push down. They did not slip open on their own. I had never in 18 months seen one of them move without someone deliberately operating it. So seeing one cracked open about 6 inches at midnight, when I had personally checked and secured all of them at the start of my shift, made my stomach drop in a way I could not quite explain in the moment. I stopped walking. I stood in that aisle for a moment, just looking at the thin strip of dark where the door was not fully closed, and the cold air coming in from outside was reaching me even from 50 feet away. And then I looked down. In the thin layer of dust and grit that always accumulated near the dock doors, there were footprints. They were coming in. There were no footprints going out. Someone had come in through that door and was somewhere in the building. I want to tell you that I handled this calmly and professionally. I did not. I turned around, walked back to my forklift, which was parked at the end of the aisle, climbed up into the cab, because being elevated felt safer for reasons I cannot entirely rationalize, and I called my supervisor from my cell phone. It was about 12:20 in the morning. My supervisor did not answer. I called again. Still no answer. I called the company's security line and stayed on with them while they dispatched both a supervisor and the local police. The police arrived first, 2 officers, and they swept the building systematically while I waited on the forklift in the center of the main floor, where I could see in all directions. They were in there for about 30 minutes. During that 30 minutes, I sat on that forklift and listened to the building in a way I had never listened to it before, trying to hear anything that wasn't the HVAC and the refrigeration units and my own breathing. Then one of the officers came back and told me they had found a man in the northwest corner of the building, in a gap between 2 rows of shelving that I passed on my nightly loop. He had made himself a sleeping space back there, using pieces of cardboard he had sourced from the recycling area near the dock. He was not aggressive. He was not armed. He was just a man who had found a warm, dry place and had been using it regularly. The officer said regularly. I asked him to clarify what he meant by regularly. He said the cardboard setup looked like it had been there for at least a few weeks, possibly longer. The man himself, once he was awake and talking, said he had been coming in through that dock door for about a month. He had figured out that the pin lock on that particular door had a worn thread that meant if you lifted it from outside with a piece of wire fed through the gap at the bottom, it would come loose. He had been doing this 2 or 3 nights a week, sleeping until about 4 in the morning, and then leaving before my rounds came back around. He had timed my rounds. He knew my schedule. For a month, this man had been inside the same building as me, sleeping 30 feet from an aisle I walked multiple times a night, and I had never known. He had listened to me working. He had heard my radio playing and my footsteps going past, and he had just laid there in his cardboard bed and waited for me to move on. I finished that shift because I did not know what else to do. I handed over to the day team, drove home, and sat in my car in my driveway for a long time. I gave my notice the following week, not because I was angry at the company, not even because I was scared exactly, but because I kept thinking about all those nights I walked that aisle feeling alone, feeling like I owned the place in the particular way that night shift workers feel like a building is theirs. That feeling was gone, and I did not think I was going to get it back. The worst part, the part I still think about, was not that he was in there, it was the schedule. He had learned my movements well enough to work around them for a month. I had no idea. I had been completely predictable and completely unaware, and those two things together made me feel more exposed than I knew how to deal with. I hope he found somewhere better to sleep. I genuinely do, but I also never worked nights in an empty building again. I did security at a 12-story office building in the downtown area for almost 3 years. It was a good job for the most part, quiet, predictable, and the building had a routine that I understood within the first couple of months. Tenants cleared out by 7 in the evening on most nights, later on busy weeks, but never past 9. By 10, the place was mine, just me and the soft hum of the elevator and the occasional ping of a heating system working through the night. My job was to walk each floor in sequence every 2 hours, check that nothing looked wrong, make sure doors that were supposed to be locked were locked, sign off on each floor in my log, and then go back to the front desk until the next round. It sounds simple, because it was. In 3 years of doing it, I found 2 things that counted as actual incidents. A broken window on the 3rd floor after a bird strike, and a contractor who had fallen asleep in a conference room and not realized the building had cleared out around him. That was it. So when the 8th floor started giving me trouble, I noticed. It started on a Wednesday night in late winter. I was doing my 11 o'clock round, and I was walking through the main open-plan office area on the 8th floor, which was the largest single space in the building. Rows of desks and workstations stretching from one end to the other under fluorescent lighting that I always kept at half power during my rounds. I heard typing, not the distant tapping of a heating pipe or the click of a computer waking from sleep. Keyboard typing, the rapid mechanical sound of someone actively writing something, coming from somewhere in the middle of the open plan area. I stopped walking immediately, and I stood there, and I listened, and it continued. Steady and consistent, the rhythm of someone deep in a task. I called out. The typing stopped instantly, complete silence. I walked the entire floor, desk by desk, checking every workstation. Every monitor was dark. Every keyboard was still. The small kitchen area was empty. Both bathroom doors opened onto empty rooms. The stairwell door was locked from my side. I stood in the middle of that floor for probably 5 minutes after finishing the sweep, and I heard nothing further. I logged it as an unexplained noise, which is the category that covers anything you cannot immediately explain and do not want to overthink. I told myself it was probably something in the building infrastructure that had happened to sound like typing at close range. Then it happened again the following Tuesday. Same floor, same area, same sound. This time, I came around the corner faster, and the typing was louder, more immediate, like I was almost on top of whoever was producing it. And then I rounded the last row of desks, and the sound stopped, and I was standing in an empty office, looking at dark monitors and still keyboards, and nothing at all to account for what I had just heard. I swept the floor again, more carefully this time, and I found nothing. I started paying attention to the 8th floor in a way I had not before. I began timing my rounds slightly differently, so I was hitting that floor at different points in each 2-hour cycle. Over the next 3 weeks, I heard the typing 4 more times, always in the same general area of the open plan space, always stopping the moment I made noise coming around a corner, never accompanied by any person or any equipment that was visibly active. I told the building manager, and he walked the floor with me during a daytime visit and found nothing unusual. I told one of the tenant company's facilities people, and she said she would have their IT department check if any machines were running automated tasks at night that might be making noise. IT found nothing. I told the day security guard on my last morning before a scheduled week off, and he did the thing that has stayed with me longer than any of the sounds did. He just nodded. He said, "Yeah, the 8th floor." And then he picked up the logbook and started reviewing the overnight notes. No elaboration, no curiosity, just a nod and 2 words, the way you acknowledge something you have known for a long time and made your peace with. I asked him what he meant. He thought about it for a moment, and then he said that in his 11 years in that building, he had heard various things on the 8th floor, and that he had found it easier to just accept the 8th floor as a floor that did things you did, not entirely understand. He said it was never dangerous. It was just present. I worked that building for another 18 months after that conversation. I heard the typing maybe a dozen more times. I stopped sweeping the floor every time it happened, because the sweeps never found anything, and they were starting to affect my relationship with the job in a way I did not want to let happen. But I never walked through that open plan space at night without listening, and I never moved through it as quickly as I moved through the other 11 floors. I don't know what I was hearing. I have a lot of ordinary explanations I have cycled through, and none of them fully accounts for the consistency of it or the way it stopped the moment I made a sound. But the thing I think about most is not the noise itself. It is the fact that a man who had worked that building for over a decade heard me describe it and just said, "Yeah, the 8th floor," like it was the most unsurprising information I could have given him. 11 years of working a building and you stop being surprised by it. I find that somehow more unsettling than anything I heard. I worked as a janitor at a community college for about 4 years. Overnight shift, starting at 11 and ending at 7 in the morning. The building was large, the kind of place that had been expanded several times over the decades, so different wings had different ages and different personalities, if that makes sense. The newer parts felt clinical and easy. The older wing, which dated back to the original building from the 60s, always felt a little heavier, harder to be in for a long time. The other overnight janitor, a guy named Marcus, who I got on well with, said he thought it was just the building materials, that older concrete and older pipes just created a different acoustic environment than modern construction. I thought he was probably right. I still worked the older wing faster than the newer one. We split the building between us every night. Marcus took the east wing, and I took the west, which included the older section. We checked in with each other on radio every hour or so, but for long stretches we were genuinely on our own, far enough apart that if something happened to either of us, it would be a few minutes before the other person could get there. I had been working the building for about a year and a half when I had the experience I still think about most clearly. It was a weeknight, around 2 in the morning. I was on the main corridor of the older wing, mopping from the stairwell toward the far end where the science labs were. It was a long corridor, maybe 120 feet, and I was about halfway down when I heard a classroom door open somewhere ahead of me. My first thought was Marcus, that he had come through to get something from the supply closet that was down my wing. I kept mopping. Then I heard a chair scrape against a hard floor, then another chair, then the unmistakable sound of several chairs being moved around. The kind of shuffling and settling that happens when a group of people are sitting down in a room at the start of something. Bags landing on desks. A zip being undone. A low murmur of voices that I could not make out distinctly, but that had the quality of people exchanging quiet words before something begins. I was very still in that corridor for about 10 seconds. My mop was dripping on the floor, and I was not moving it. It was 2 a.m. There was no class, no event, no meeting scheduled in that building. I had the access log. Nothing was on it. Marcus and I were the only people who should have been in the building. I walked down the corridor toward the sounds. As I got closer, I could identify which room they were coming from. The door was slightly open, a thin strip of light visible at the frame. I reached out and pushed it fully open. 30 empty chairs, all of them facing forward, arranged exactly as they would be for a class. Not one of them out of place. No bags on any desk, no papers, no jackets over the backs of chairs. Every monitor in the room dark. The whiteboard clean. The room completely, entirely, unoccupied. I stepped inside and stood in the middle of it, and I looked at those 30 chairs for a while. The room was cold, in the particular way of a room where the heating has not been running. Not the cold of a room that was recently full of people. I got Marcus on the radio, and I said I needed him to come to the West Wing. He came and I stood in the doorway, and I let him listen to the silence of the corridor for a moment, and then I told him what I had heard. His expression was hard to read. He asked me a few practical questions, whether I had heard anyone on the stairs, whether I had checked the bathroom on that corridor. I had not. We checked the bathroom together. Empty. We finished that night quickly and clocked out about half an hour early, neither of us saying much about why. I went back to that classroom the next day during my day-off hours in the afternoon when the building was full of students and noise, and I stood in the doorway of it and it was just a classroom. Plastic chairs, fluorescent lights, a whiteboard with a half-erased diagram on it. Completely ordinary. I worked that building for another 2.5 years after that night. I never heard anything like it again. But I mopped that corridor faster than any other corridor in the building from that point on, and I never once felt comfortable pausing in front of that door. Some rooms you just move through. You don't linger. You do not let yourself think about what the room might be doing when you are not there. I have been a nurse for 8 years, and I have worked nights for most of that time. I want to say at the start that I am a practical person. I like evidence. I like things that can be demonstrated and tested. And when unusual things happen in a clinical setting, my first instinct is always to look for the clinical explanation. Medication interactions, sleep deprivation in staff. The well-documented ways that very sick people experience things that are not there. These are real phenomena, and they account for a great deal of what gets described as strange in hospitals. I am telling you this because I want you to understand that what I am about to describe is not something I reached for willingly. It is something that happened and that I have not been able to file cleanly under any of the usual categories, and I have been trying for 4 years. I was working a night shift on a general medical ward. It was a quiet night by the standards of that unit, which means nobody was in acute crisis, and the ward had settled into the particular rhythm of the early morning hours. Observations done, medications given, everything logged. I was at the nurse's station at around 3 a.m. catching up on documentation when one of the call lights came on. Room 14. I walked down. The patient in room 14 was a man in his late 70s who had been on the ward for about a week at that point. He had been admitted for a cardiac issue that was being managed and monitored, and his trajectory was stable. I knew him reasonably well from the previous nights I had worked. He was a quiet man, thoughtful, the kind of patient who says thank you every time you do anything for him and means it. He was sitting up in bed when I came in, and he looked completely alert. I asked him if he was all right, and he said yes, he was fine. But he would appreciate it if I could ask the man standing in the corner to leave, because he found it a little hard to settle with someone just standing there watching him. I looked at the corner he indicated. It was the corner near the window, between the wardrobe unit and the outer wall. It was empty. I told him there was no one there. He shook his head very gently, not argumentatively, just the way you shake your head when you are certain of something and the other person has not seen it yet. He said, "No, he is right there. He has been there for a little while now. He does not say anything, but he just stands there and looks, and it makes it hard to settle down to sleep." He described what he was seeing. A man, he said, standing very still, not looking at him directly, but facing in his general direction. He could not make out the face clearly. He said the figure was just present in that corner in a way that felt deliberate. I pulled a chair over to his bedside, and I sat with him for about 40 minutes. I want to be clear that his mental state was completely intact. He was not confused, not distressed in an agitated way, not feverish. He was calm and clear, and he was describing something he was seeing in the same reasonable tone he used to tell me about his grandchildren or ask about the weather. He was not frightened of it exactly. He just found it unsettling in the way that anyone would find a stranger standing in their room unsettling. We talked for a while about other things, and eventually he said he felt tired enough to try to sleep, and he thanked me for sitting with him. I dimmed the lights when I left, and I stood in the doorway for a moment, and I looked at the corner near the window, and it was just a corner. He passed away 2 days later, not unexpectedly. His cardiac situation had been progressing in a direction we had been monitoring, and his family had been contacted and had been able to come and be with him. It was, by the standards of these things, a peaceful end. I have worked that ward many times in the 4 years since. I have been in room 14 dozens of times for dozens of different patients. Nothing unusual has happened in there, nothing I could point to. But every single time I go into that room, regardless of who is in the bed or what the circumstances are, I look at the corner near the window when I come in. I do not know what I am checking for. I do not know what I would do if I saw something. I just look. It has become a habit so automatic that I barely notice doing it anymore. I have thought about that man's calm, about the fact that he was not frightened, just uncomfortable in the way of someone with unwanted company. I have wondered sometimes, in the way you wonder about things you cannot answer, whether the figure he saw was something that had been in that room for a long time before him and would be there long after. Whether every patient in room 14 over the years has seen it, and most of them have just not mentioned it. I have not asked the patients who come after about it. That feels like a line I should not cross professionally. But I look at the corner every time I come in. I have never stopped looking.